Well, a simplistic but quite useful view of supply chains is that they consist of a number of flows. So we typically talk of forward or downstream flows of products, material going to the end user, to a final customer. We talk of upstream or reverse flows, which are typically information flows, data flows, demand data, consumption data, and so on. And then the third flow is money flow, and that's normally the flow of money upstream. So it's customers essentially paying suppliers on and on, echelon to echelon upstream. Reverse flows in commercial supply chains have become quite prominent, or increasingly so in recent years, driven by a number of things. Legislation, so increasingly legislation is placing responsibility on original equipment manufacturers and manufacturers in general to take greater responsibility for doing something appropriate with their products at their end of their useful service lives. There's a growing awareness of the concept of the circular economy, and increasingly people complying with the circular economy rather than the traditional linear economy. And we're also seeing a growth in product returns. So typically online shopping, online retail, the internet has seen a huge growth, not only in that kind of trading, but in products going back to the supplier. And that has had a side effect of increasing money flows downstream, so essentially money going back to the consumer. So that's why they've become really quite significant in commercial supply chains. Routine but challenging. Well, they are routine to defence logisticians. Defence logisticians for decades have been quite accustomed to managing reverse flows. What makes them routine? Well, in steady state operations, it's quite normal to see, for any given operation, significant volumes of, should we say, engines, major assemblies, major subsystems being taken out of vehicles, aircraft, and so on, and being pushed upstream, reverse flowing back to, often back to the UK mainland or to some other depth facility, usually to undertake or be subject to some particular kind of maintenance, repair and overhaul. In enduring operations, any military operation with some endurance, some length to it, will normally see military units quite routinely rotating. It's a process known as relief in place. The military also speak about roulement, and it's where one unit is taken out of theatre and replaced by another. And it's quite typical for that unit as it goes out of theatre to take all of its equipment with it. Quite a major logistic reverse flow operation. If you imagine a major coalition operation with several nations involved, then it's not unusual for one coalition partner nation to exit theatre with all of its equipment, all of its inventory, all of its logistics infrastructure. Quite a significant reverse movement, and to be replaced by the replacing partner nation. And I think finally, really, the other aspect of routine activity is in drawdown, when military forces progressively reduce their presence in anticipation of a cessation of hostilities and an end to the operation. And so you'll see a progressive reduction, a reverse flow of, in particular, static, warehoused type storage and inventory. So inventory volumes will flow backwards as those forces progressively draw down. The challenges to that relatively routine business, well, a lot of military equipment is quite sensitive, and so rather than move it by potentially vulnerable and insecure surface means, most militaries will choose to use strategic airlift. And the problem with strategic airlift is that there's not much of it and it's in heavy demand. So you need to prioritise, and it requires very careful management. Reverse flows, the flows out of theatre, have to be balanced with forward flows, the flows into theatre, because although you might see forces progressively drawing down, inevitably there is the prospect of increased enemy activity, maybe some political vacillation or prolonging of the operation. And what you can therefore see is a real challenge in managing the balance of the flows, The majority of it may be upstream in reverse, but there will always be the need to sustain troops who are currently deployed. And getting that balance right can be very, very taxing, very challenging. And frankly, no matter how brilliantly you plan the reverse flows, it can all go horribly wrong if the enemy has a vote and they ramp up their activity, or indeed political indecision leads to a prolongation of the operation. And so you can actually see those reverse flows, carefully planned as they were, stopping dead or at least being significantly disrupted. So very challenging business. And I think it's also fair to say that inevitably for any defence business, any defence ministry and its armed forces, those strategic movement assets that control both forward and reverse flows will be in huge demand. There are never enough. And when you consider, for example, in perhaps a many-nation coalition operation, you could see several nations competing for very limited airspace. Many people will be aware, for example, that the Camp Bastion in Afghanistan for several years was one of the busiest airfields in the world. And so fighting for airspace can be a very significant challenge. But likewise, road networks, rail networks, port infrastructure, everybody's trying to use a relatively limited range of facilities. So I think cooperation, collaboration, careful command and control is fundamental to success. And I think I would conclude by saying that defence logisticians do this stuff routinely. And I would suggest that given the growth in reverse flows in the commercial logistics business, that commercial logisticians could learn a lot from defence logisticians.